Hi, my name's Terry Dana Jakimiak II, and I am the Theater Professor. And you're tuning in for another episode of the Theater Professor vidcast. This week, using ArtRage for the desktop, we're going to learn how to create mountains. Big, burly mountains. So grab your stylus, grab your program, and let's get to doing some art. All right, here we are in ArtRage for the desktop. You can see I've already got it open. I've already got a file created. And what we're going to be doing this week is actually in response to a couple of questions that I've gotten recently on the website. The website, for those that don't know, is www.thetheaterprofessor.com. And the questions were in relation to the Bob Ross sort of wet-on-wet technique that he uses. Now, I'm going to be honest. I am not traditionally an oil painter. My medium that I tend to use most often when I'm doing natural media is actually watercolor. So, I had to do a little research. I had watched the Bob Ross videos many, many years ago, and I enjoyed watching him on PBS, and what he could do was pretty fabulous, but I had just never dabbled in oil paints. In fact, really, the only one in my family that had done anything close to that is my wife, and that's in acrylics, which is still not really oil paint. So I understand the wet-on-wet technique, but I didn't really know how to create it in ArtRage. So after a little bit of research and after a little bit of playing around with things, I think I've come up with a couple of pretty decent ways to mimic what Bob Ross does in regards to his mountains. Haven't gotten to the trees yet, haven't gotten to the lakes, but hopefully this episode will give you an idea of what I'm doing to create this wet-on-wet technique. All right? So the first thing that we actually need to do is something that I don't generally do when I'm doing a painting, and that's we're going to cover the canvas in white. Now, you can do this in two different ways. One way is to just grab your fill tool over here, make sure that you have white, and you press once, and boom, there it is. We now have a white canvas. And a way to check that is if you grab, just any of your painting tools. Let me grab, I don't even know what preset I've got on right now. I'm just going to grab this one right here. Make it big. And then grab my palette knife, hard out smudge. Yeah, and you can see the white is mixing in with the green. Okay, so I've essentially created a thin layer. I'll bring this up a bit. A thin layer of white on the canvas. Now that's all well and good. I'm going to undo like crazy. There we go. But I actually prefer grabbing my oil brush. We'll just do normal square, changing it to white, and then increasing the size a bunch and painting it on. Just like I'm doing here. And why would I do it that way? Well, one, I just like painting. So it's a little more fun for me than if I'm doing just a fill. And I feel like it gives me a little more control over what I'm doing. It may not, but I may feel that way. All right. So we have our canvas now based in a white, and that white is what's actually going to help to create the wet-on-wet technique type thing that Bob Ross did. Not does, he did. All right, I wish I had his hair. I don't. So let's come over here, and for our base mountains, one of the things I've been playing with recently is creating my own mixing palettes. And the way you do that is if you go into the reference and click the second icon here, it says New Scrap. So I click it. I'm going to close my reference. I'm going to bring this new scrap over here. And if I were to grab my paintbrush, and I'm going to reduce the size a little bit so it's not quite so big. And if I were to grab some colors, so I'm going to grab actually, let me see what I have in my samples here. Indigo, no, Prussian blue. I'm going to grab Prussian blue. I'm going to lay that down, and I'm going to grab my blue black. I'm going to lay that down. Then I'm going to grab my palette knife. I'm going to mix the two. Okay. And my palette knife. Now, the one problem here is you can't undo. Okay. So, like, I can't undo this mixture that I just did. So if I wanted to, well, I can, but it's here. You can't do your shortcut. So there's that undo right there. And the other thing is, notice how you can't see the size of your palette knife. So I just started mixing and realized my palette knife was too big. So I need to come out here. I'm going to reduce the size a little bit. There we go. So now I'm getting a color that's in between the two. And then if you're on a PC, if you hold Alt, you can select that color. Okay? You can see my color got selected there. So you can hide this reference by clicking that. And just so you know, it's still there. And you can actually do it. You can do it that way as well, as if you hover over and turn off the eye. And I'm going to turn it off for right now because I don't need to look at it while I'm working here. All right, so now we have a color. We have our canvas painted white. And I'm going to grab my palette knife. Now, I've been playing with this actually a lot today. And if you're following my Twitter, which is at theater... Oh, the theater professor? No, it's at THTR professor. Twitter has a much shorter naming thing, so I had to go with something that wasn't the theater professor. So it's just THTR professor. So if you were following that, you saw that I posted a picture today of some mountains that I was working on just to kind of test out a couple of things. So I've got my palette knife. I've got the hard out smudge. I'm actually going to increase my size. Okay. And this is where it becomes interesting because I'm going to increase my loading. And we'll take it up to 75% to begin with. And the other thing that I do is I actually lock rotation, and you'll see why in a second. Now my rotation is locked at 0 right now. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and you'll see as I pull it down, it blends with that white, which is fine, you know? It creates some texture. I'm not liking this part here, so I'm going to undo a little bit, not a bunch. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate there we go. So now I can actually, and come down this way as well. There we go. You can drag some of that blue. And then you can take and you can switch it back over to here. And every time I'm doing that, I'm using my rotation. I'm rotating the palette knife. Okay, if we zoom out. Now right now this mountain's a little too symmetrical for my like. So I'm going to come over here and we're going to try and do something that's a little less symmetrical. I'm going to use some of the settings I was using earlier. I really like the 22 angle. And then 40-ish. Oops. There we go. Reduce my size a little bit. Sorry, I'm not quite as talkative today. I'm just really, you get that when you get a little focused, right? It's like, oh, I can do this. And I'm still, again, that white is underneath. And we're going to go into some other things here and how to create some of the snow effects. And you notice I just keep popping back and forth, right? I go, there we go. I pop from, take my loading up. I pop my rotation back and forth. I keep kind of playing with it. And that's the great thing with this is if you see something you don't like, you can always hit the undo button. Close you down for right now. Okay, there we go. Okay, now that I've got the base of my mountain started, I like this mountain better than the first mountain. First mountain seems too regular. Now that I have the base of the mountain started, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my loading down to 0. I'm just going to drag this a little bit to even out just a little bit. I don't want it too even, but I do. With what I'm doing here, just kind of, especially down at the base here. Now, one of the things that that you can do in the real world with natural media, you can then take your palette knife and kind of pull some of the paint off. That's much harder to do in the digital world. There's not kind of a pull paint off move. What you can do to kind of create that type of effect is if you take and put your paint back into white and do just a little bit of loading and take my pressure down. Notice I just put that, and then I'm going to take my loading all the way down. And that's almost like pulling the paint off, okay? It's not exactly like it, but we are working in a digital medium, which is a little different, right? It shouldn't be the exact same. If it was the exact same, then we just work in the real thing. What's the point in working in digital if you're not going to use the digital tools to create things? So you can see here that I've taken it down, and you can always, the other thing you can do is you can pick up some of the blue areas that you like I really like this here, and then bring up my loading just a couple percent, and you can see I start to put some of that blue back in. Okay, so we have the basis for our mountain right there. Now comes the hard part a lot of times with the digital is creating that snow on the side of the mountain. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our white, and you started to kind of see it when I was trying to lighten up my blue, and I have my loading at like 3%. I'm going to reduce the size of my palette knife. It might be a little too much. And I'm going to rotate myself to 40-ish. And let's see what happens. Take my pressure up just a little bit. Now, one of the things I don't like is I don't like these hard lines, and there's no way with the palette knife to kind of flow into and then back out of. So you end up getting those hard lines. So to get rid of those, I jump my loading back down to 0. Maybe zoom in just a little bit, and I kind of brush them back up. Now, some areas I do want the hard line. Right here at this, I'm creating kind of like a ridge here, and I don't want to lose that hard line. And there we go. We're starting to get exactly what I want. Come in here. And if I want more, I can always take my pressure up, so it'll go a little longer. There we go. There we go. And maybe do this here. So it's like another ridge. Okay. So you can see we're starting to get that feeling of a mountain. Now, when I paint, I tend not to try and go uber realistic. That's just my style of painting. Some people, and part of that is because when I'm doing my theater design, I have to try and be as realistic as possible. So when I'm just doing recreational painting, I prefer just to have some fun and not necessarily create uber realistic. Now, if I needed to, I could, but that's not of interest to me right now. So we start to get this feeling of what we're going here, of this mountain. And so we want to add some shadow. So I'm actually going to pick up this color here and take it down just a little bit. And make sure my rotation is the way I want it, which is a 20. I'm going to grab my load, grab it up to like 3% again. And we'll do 5. And put a little shadow on this side. And this is our happy little mountain. Blend some of that in. And what I want to do is I'm going to rotate back over to 40. Watch. Because what I'm going to do here, bring my load back up. So I'm going to come right along this. Oops. 40 is not. Oh, there we go. And I screwed that up, so I hit undo. There we go. Great things about undo is that you can undo stuff. And what I'm doing is I'm just creating a nice edge. To where that snow fall off happens. You see that? Get a nice shadow going there. And you can come in and you can continue to play with this. I mean, there's no need to stop anywhere. So now you have the basic idea of our mountain there, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you if you wanted to do, and this is going to be very simple, a simple mountainscape. I'm not going to save that. Okay, so the size I'm using here is my screen size roughly, which is, it is 1600 by 860. I'm at 150 pixels per inch using the canvas, and we will go ahead and click OK. I'm going to zoom out so you guys have a better view. Or I'm going to make my palette knife smaller there. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our brush. You can follow along at this point. I'm going to grab our brush, going to go to white. Going to make our brush bigger. I'm going to paint our canvas white. Gonna paint our canvas white. We're gonna paint our canvas white. So if you get my newsletter, then you know that I was in the dentist yesterday, and that is why, that and combined with the fact that, not yesterday, but on Friday, combine that with the fact that I went and saw a theater show in Pittsburgh on Thursday, I was not able to get my post up when I usually do. So I apologize for that. Now that I'm back on my schedule, I'm getting this done, and we will be on our regularly scheduled broadcasts in the coming weeks. Next week's, I'm saying a lot. I'm going to have to fix that. Next week, I will be actually going over a lot of the different settings in the layers panel. So that was another request that I got. So you'll be seeing that. You'll be seeing that next week. All right. So we now have everything is white, and we're going to grab a color over here. Let's grab, ooh, that is a little too much. Yeah, let's test it. So what I'm going to do here for my sky is I'm going to cross hatch some paint in. I'm on the same layer. I'm not doing multi-layers here. And then I'm going to grab my palette knife, set it to hard out smudge. I'm going to increase the size. I'm sitting at about 213%. And I'm just going to start cross-hatching. Now, for those that don't know, cross-hatching is essentially creating an X. So I'm going X, 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 X. But I tend to go very fast, so sometimes it turns into a figure 8. And all I'm doing is I'm starting to create a little atmosphere here. Maybe grab a little more of my blue. Because again, it's mixing with that white that I've created on the bottom layer. Now there are other ways you can do a sky. This is a very simple sky. I'm not. Oops, that was just a line. That was not an X. This is one of many ways. So don't take what I'm doing here as gospel. But the reason I like it is I don't have to go back in and put in clouds for what I'm showing you. Now, if you wanted to, you could go in and do clouds. I can show you that too, and I'll show you just an easy, quick cloud. Grab some of this blue up here. Make sure we got. Okay, so we have a sky, a rough sky. If I wanted to put clouds in, I'd switch over to white. I'd take my loading up a little bit. I'd reduce my size, and I'd start to put. Let me zoom in so you can see. I'd just start to put some white down. Once I'm done putting my white down, I take my loading back to 0 and start to kind of feather it out a little bit. And you can start to see we get a nice little cloud there. And I'd play with that. I'm not going to play with it right now. All right, so we've done that. So now let's put our mountain on it. Again, at this point, I'm not going to start a new layer. I'm doing all of this on the same layer. And that's the wet on wet technique. You want your paints to interact with each other. You have to be a little careful, but you do indeed want your paints to interact with each other. So let's go ahead and create our, there we go. And let's grab the colors that I used, which I believe was Prussian blue. I wonder what other blues I have. French ultramarine. And I'm on the wrong. There we go. Too big. Okay, there's my Prussian blue, and I'm going to get my blue black. There. Going to grab my palette knife. I'm going to mix. There we go. I'm going to grab that color right there. Right there. Then I'm going to make that disappear. Got my palette knife ready. I'm going to lock my rotation. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. I'm going to increase my size just a little bit. Bring my loading up. And again, remember, undo is our friend here if we don't like what's coming out. Change my rotation. And I'm going to undo all of that. I know. You're like, what? I'm actually going to take my load up. There we go. Take my pressure down just a little bit. And this is where, I'm testing things. I want to see exactly what I want. And I encourage you to do the same. There we go. Okay. Take this down to 20. Oops. There we go. You can see I'm shaping, and that's what I'm doing here is I'm shaping my mountain. Okay? Shaping my mountain. Maybe I'll come over here and add a second little mountain. I'm going to change my rotation too. Reducing the size of my palette knife. A little more. There we go. And sometimes it's about reducing the size of your palette knife. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to adjust the size of things. It's one of the advantages we have in digital painting is that we can quickly change the size of the tool we're using, which you can't always do when you are... And I'm just going to add a little. There we go. Maybe we'll do one over here too. A happy little mountain. Okay, now that we have our basic outlines, I'm going to increase the size. I'm just going to start laying in my color. I haven't changed anything yet. And again, we're on top of our white. Then I'm going to take my loading down and I'm going to blend it together. One thing to be aware of when using the palette knife is that it drags, when you don't have a color on it, it drags the color from where you... So notice there I started a little low, accidentally grabbed too much white, and it changed that. So I'm actually going to switch to go the other way because I want more of the blue in there. I'm actually going to uncheck lock rotation for the time being, because I don't need it while I'm doing this. Reduce swoop to... And you notice I'm not going over crazy. I like the texture that I'm getting with the canvas, so I'm not overworking it. We can sometimes be a little, be a little too willing to overwork something. There we go. Bring that way. All right, so we have our mountains. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and lay in our white. And if you remember how we did that, we're going to increase our loading just a couple percentage points. About 3. We're going to grab our white. We're going to take our pressure down a little bit. And one of the things you want to think about is which side is the sun hitting the mountain? And that's the side that gets the white snow. So I'm going to have this side over here hit the mountain, or the light hit this side of it. And oops, need to lock my rotation again. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm working on my ridge. If you remember from earlier, I did that little ridge. increase my size a little bit. Just a little more loading and pressure. There we go. Decrease my size. And you can see I very quickly decrease and increase my size. Again, don't be afraid to do that. Okay, I'm going to take my loading down to 0. I'm going to blend some of this, not all of it, but I am going to blend some of it. Again, we're not able to necessarily replicate Bob Ross exactly with ArtRage, but we can create that same feeling, and you can create your own mountains, and we all have our own styles, right? All right, I'm liking how that's looking right now, the white. I'm not going to touch the white right now. What I am going to do, oops, I want to take off my lock, is I'm going to blend out my bottoms right now, because I'm not going to do anything in front of these mountains. So I'm going to blend out my bottoms so that they come down here. And I'm picking up my pen each time so that I drag that color to the outskirts. And there we go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come over here. One of the things that I haven't done yet is I haven't dragged out any of the color on the dark side. Remember we did that earlier? I'm going to drag out a little bit of that color on this side because I feel like it's just a little too dark for my taste. And again, we're doing that with the white, a little bit of loading. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to, we're going to blend back in the blue until we get where we like it. And then we can color pick like that right there. Give us just a little more loading. Reduce our size. There we go. And remember, I wanted that nice shadow along the ridge. So I'm going to actually try and do that right here. And just like that. There we go. And then maybe grab my palette knife, turn my lock rotation on, grab a little darker for my shadow, and maybe do some, just a little bit. I'm just taking, again, you can kind of play with your angles. I'm going to take my load up a little bit, or a lot bit. Take my pressure up just a bit. I'm just kind of dragging some shadow lines in here. Now the other way you could do this if you wanted to is you could use the brush, and you, like the actual paintbrush, you could paint, too big though. You could paint just a little bit in, like this, and then grab your palette knife and rotate it. Oops. And then grab your palette knife. I prefer just to put the paint on my palette knife. I find that I enjoy it more. But to each their own, right? And let's see, I'm going to want, just looking here, I'm going to want a little bit of shadow along this ridge here. so that it looks like this is receive. Well, maybe I like it. Let me see. Now, right now, all of this is, all of this is very, all of this is very abstract-ish. Not abstract, that's the wrong word. Now I'm just mumbling. Hold on. There we go. And then I'm going to add a nice dark color right there. Right along there. I'm going to do it this way. Just separate those two mountains. There we go. Maybe do a nice little light color up here. Like the sun is hitting it. Really quite nice. There we go. Now we've got a little bit of separation. All right, so that is this week's, is just talking a little bit about the wet on wet technique. Now this can be used in any number of ways. You can use it, what I was doing earlier is I was actually trying to create an entire landscape this way. And it is not easy, but it's not hard. I would say that it is not as easy as if you were doing it via the actual natural media, but it is definitely not that difficult. Somebody brand new could easily pick this up and start playing with it and start to create some nice little landscapes. Now, one of the things you could then come in and do is you could definitely come in and put some detail work in. Oops. Sometimes my stylus gets too close to the tablet and stray marks happen. You could definitely start to come in and do some detail work like that and really kind of play with it to create exactly what you want. But that is, I'm not going to sit here and bore you with that. What I wanted to just kind of show you is that you can start to create some of that wet on wet technique. All right, so I hope this is helpful for those of you that are trying to create this look. I would love to see some people test this out, what I've shown you, and see if you can create very similar things yourself. Remember, if you're a bronze member on the website, you can go ahead and post to the forums, and remember those bronze memberships are free. There is no cost to them. So I would encourage you to join the website and then go ahead and post what you're doing in the forums, because I'd like to see some other people's work. Also, this is the time that I want to give a wonderful thank you to ArtRage, which is one of my Patreon supporters. Recent Patreon pledge, and thank you so much. I cannot begin to, I use ArtRage, and I've been using ArtRage now for a little bit. I'm not, I don't work for Ambient Design. I'm not an ArtRage employee, but they have been extremely helpful when I've had questions in regards to the program. Again, ArtRage isn't the only program I use. I use Photoshop. I use Corel Painter. I'm one of those who believes that multiple tools can be used to create what you're trying to create. I like to experiment like this. I'd never done this before with these mountains. I'm like, okay, this looks pretty nifty. So make sure that you try this out. Remember, ArtRage does have a free trial, so you can give it a test run. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me or contact me via www.thetheaterprofessor.com. As always, if you think any of my videos are beneficial and you have an extra $1 or $2 to spare, I ask that you toss it my way. It helps to run the website, allows me to purchase equipment so I can make these tutorials and continue to make these tutorials better. And the way to do that is to stop by thetheaterprofessor.com. There's a button right off to the side. called Patreon. You become one of my patrons, and you can actually receive rewards depending on what level you are able to donate to. So thank you guys so much. I'm really having fun with this. I've been loving my email conversations with everybody that I've been having conversations with. It really does make what I do feel like I'm doing something and making a difference. So take care of yourselves. Continue to do art. And my name is Terry Dana Jakimiak II, and I am the Theater Professor.